You know, I think that I've got an addiction. An addiction to cool things. Which is why I have with me here today a new liquid cooler once again. Haha, you know? Because liquid coolers are cool. Yeah, okay, so if you haven't already cringed your face off with that terrible joke, close this video and unsubscribe from me, then yes, today once again, we're taking a look at a new liquid cooler from ID Cooling, the Dashflow 240. It's a 240mm all-in-one closed loop cooler that, at least on paper, promises to fix the somewhat average performance of their previous coolers, but we'll find that out for ourselves. Oh, and by the way, this is something I actually didn't buy from China, but rather I got it locally here in Malaysia at 405 Malaysian ringgit. This makes it $99 and compete directly with other big names brands like, SZXT, Cooler Master, Thermotake, and the like. But does it actually perform on par or better than its competitors? Join this guy overly excited about trying new liquid coolers on a journey into finding out what the ID Cooling Dashflow 240 has to offer. Let us first start off by taking a look at that wonderful pump head. It's powered via a SATA cable instead of a normal 3-pin header, and it's a much fatter design than their previous models. As we all know though, it's not how big it is, it's how you use it. And this bad boy pumps out a massive 450 liters per hour. That's not all the tricks that it has up its sleeve though, as on closer inspection, the fittings on the pump block are of a G1/4" design, which in fact means that this isn't purely a closed loop cooler, but rather one that is technically serviceable and, most importantly, expandable. If you get yourself a GPU with a water block and the appropriate tubes and fittings, it could potentially cool that too, and it shouldn't be an issue as well if the pump can push that, 450 liters per hour. Bigger pumps might mean bigger noise as well, so how does it sound like on a full 12 volt power source? Let's have a listen. For the first time ever, not a perfectly silent pump. I could consistently hear a bit of ticking noise made by the pump. I'm not sure if this is caused by the air bubbles in the loop or just the pump itself, however, but it might warrant an investigation in the future. As far as socket compatibility goes, it pretty much supports everything mainstream short of maybe Threadripper TR4, but the copper base on this guy is just a little bit too small for that anyway. And yes, what product these days would be complete without RGB lighting? ID Cooling hasn't cheaped out on the tubing either, as you get 350mm of nice sleeved tubing to bring together the pump and radiator. Speaking of that radiator, it's just a standard 27mm, so nothing to see here. So let's move on to the fans provided that help keep that radiator cool. Up the back of the fan, they rock the model number of ID 12025M12B, but I found that these were also extremely similar in looks and specs to the DF12025 RGB. They might be the exact same fan. In fact, the box itself that they came in mentioned 12025-4-RGB. Anyway, going lightly into these specs, expect speeds of about 900 to 2000 RPM, noise levels of between 16 to 32 decibels, and a flow rate of 56.5 CFM and a static pressure rating of 1.9mm H2O. They're of a 9-blade design, got them rubber pads on each corner to cut vibration noise, and a good friend wouldn't let their buddy feel left out, so yes, these also rock RGB lights, just like the pump head. One might describe them lights as loud, but their noise levels certainly aren't, as even at full power, they don't produce all that much noise. Have a listen. As usual as well, I use my wind meter to measure how much airflow we're getting out of these fans. With these numbers, we're looking for the differences between the air pushed unobstructed and when the radiator is introduced. The smaller the differences between them, the better, which indicate a higher static pressure. The fans that ID Cooling provided stacks up quite well, placing them slightly below the performance of the NMX twister pressures. We're done with the numbers, so let's get it strapped in and fired up to see how it performs. The installation guide is pretty easy to follow, but during my testing I encountered an extremely massive flaw. But first, we'll talk about our results. Temperatures. I'm willing to bet that the temperatures would have been sufficiently good were it not for one fatal flaw. You see, after running a few benchmark runs, I started to notice that I was getting abnormally high temperatures of 88 Celsius and above, and when I applied pressure onto the block itself, the temperatures would drop down to a much more reasonable 72 odd Celsius. Now, this is weird because the first time that I installed this cooler, the temperatures were actually quite good, but as I took it on and off to test for other variables and coolers side by side, I noticed that the temperatures would keep gradually getting worse and worse. And so after removing the cooler and looking at it, it occurred to me. The design of this mounting mechanism is so bad that the pressure between the IHS and the loop's cold plate deteriorates only after a handful of installs, in turn making the contact between the two gradually worsen and opening up a gap. Examining it, it occurred to me that this was due to a few reasons. Number 1. There weren't any notches on the head of the long screws itself and the mounting bracket behind to really secure them down and to prevent them from spinning freely. The only thing that really stopped this from happening in the beginning was a thin layer of foam that sits between the rear bracket and the motherboard, which was tight to begin with but soon turned loose over time. Which brings me then to reason number 2, the foam itself. You see, the screws rotating is one thing, but the foam that helped to keep the pressure of the cold plate onto the processor's IHS started to compact and get thinner and thinner, lowering the amount of contact between the two. This is further exacerbated by point number 3. The mounting screws are just way too long. When trying to figure out what was going on, I noticed that there was a substantial amount of wriggle room for the whole pump block, even though everything was supposed to be properly secured. The nut that was supposed to push the pump block onto the processor was barely touching the bracket on the block, rendering it useless at its job, making it only useful at, keeping the block from falling off. That's all. In fact, I can't even use the cooler effectively now. The contact is so bad right now that the moment I start my stress test, no matter how hard I try to secure the screws, it jumps straight over 90 Celsius and just shuts down. Have you ever heard that saying that beauty is only skin deep? Well, that saying applies here in such a big way that it's shocking. The Dashflow 240 has the hallmarks of being a unique looking cooler that screams performance and premium, but it fails so hard in my tests that honestly, it's really not even worth talking about. Here's the thing as well, this isn't the first cooler that I've tested that uses this same mounting mechanism, and almost every cooler that I've tested that uses it performed rather averagely. Maybe I didn't even use them long enough to see their mounting mechanism fail, but if you want my advice, stay clear from everything and anything that uses a backplate that looks even remotely like this. Yeah, sure, you can go in and fix it by adding more padding and maybe taking a Dremel to those screws and shortening them, but honestly, out of the box I expect these things to be perfect, and fixing it really isn't worth the effort. To make matters worse, this cooler isn't cheap at all. It's not like I spent an extremely low amount for it as well as, in those cases, even if it failed, yeah, it's no big deal. It didn't cost that much. No, the truth is that it cost the same or even more than what some of its competitors are asking for, and so unless you really like the aesthetics of this cooler, there's absolutely no reason to get it. My advice? Just stay clear of it. You know how there's that saying that not all glitters is gold? Yeah, that saying kind of applies to this product that's seriously not gold. It's just disappointing. So yeah, this product is pretty much a bust, but I hope you guys at least learned something from it, If you liked that this video failed, you can like it, I guess. Dislike it if you were expecting more. Stay subscribed and notified, and my name is Yang, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.